Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprint 2088 review. This is a normal 2-week sprint ending on May 30th. So let's begin. I'm going to start with this overview. Jeffrey's going to follow up with the UI, Adam on providers, Joe is going to do the platform, and Keenan would do the API, but he can't make it, so I'm going to do the API. As you can see in this sprint, 99 PRs were merged this sprint with 108 opened. It was a pretty typical sprint. We had 22 bug fixes, 29 enhancements, and a sprinkling of the rest. And over to Jeffrey.
Hi, good morning. In this sprint, we had 19 PRs, 4 bugs, 4 enhancements, and 11 others. So this is the overview. I can explain it in the upcoming slides. And next slide, please. So while editing few providers, there were some authentication issues, and it was fixed by Gilbert by adding some additional checks and performed, and auth-key values were added to the initial API values. Next slide. While trying to delete a cloud volume, there were some warning notifications that were popping up. So this was fixed by adding a React state component. Next slide, please. So there was an issue while opening the configuration settings C and U collections tab. So we handled a missing variable. So that was fixed, and it was a lot of things were handled in the backend. So the UI is okay now. Next slide. For the host summary properties, we have 3 pages named devices, operating system, and BMM information pages. So we converted the HTML table to a React component, which we used it as from the MIQ structured list component. Next slide, please. Server profile related information were added to the list of physical servers and its corresponding server details page in this PR. Yeah. Next slide. Adam had added an additional field into this page. So this is for the workers which had the ability of changing the counts and memory threshold. For now, we have for the UI workers as count. Next slide. These are the technical depths. So in short, Gilbert had removed a lot of Angular code and so many unused code. And Keenan has also used support mix in a lot of support. I'm sorry. Gilbert had, Keenan had added a lot of mix-in features to support mix-in features. Yeah, over to Adam.
Thank you. So for core of this sprint, we added a last refresh success state to the XC management system table. This allows us to be able to show a user when the last time a refresh was successful. Previously, we were only able to show the last time refresh ran. And so if the refresh was currently failing, it was not able for them to find out when the last time it did succeed, so that they might be able to find out what was wrong. We also refactored how we're setting the provider parent ID in the core persister to clean things up, as opposed to using the persister class name. We also converted some host operations to use supports feature, as they were some of the last ones to use validates. And we're also using the provider directly as for the model class for the child tables, as opposed to trying to guess it by looking at the persister class. This worked fine until we started changing up the structure of some of the namespaces for Cinder and more recently for IBM Cloud VPC and Power VS. So we had to have a bunch of overrides for those. And now it'll just pull the parent directly from the provider class. For Amazon, our scheduled instance type updater put a PR in to add the following metal flavors. We also updated the GitHub Actions script to set the committer and author to be MIQ bot, since before it would pull the latest commit author for the branch. So it looked like, for example, Jason made the pull request and the commit when it was actually just the bot. Next slide. For Azure, Nazar added create and delete database support for cloud databases. And he also refactored the Azure Connect to be able to accept a service name, which was able to reduce a lot of duplication that existed between the operations and refresh, both of which were building the service directly. And so now you can pass that straight to Connect and it'll return you the proper service. So Azure also deprecated their Germany cloud, which had its own Active Directory server. And so anyone trying to connect to this would get a timeout trying to connect to the AD server that no longer exists. So the Germany regions are now part of the public Azure cloud. And so we connect to that appropriately. And so that fixed up that timeout for anyone using Germany regions. For Cisco Intersight, Taj added a button to deploy and unassign server profiles on the physical servers page. And he also improved the refresh to collect physical server information about the NICs on those physical servers. Next slide. For Google, we fixed a couple of refresh failures. It seems like Google on the back end is changing what is allowed to be blank and what isn't, since we never really saw those before and the code hasn't changed in quite a while, but it seems like load balancers are allowed to have a status of nil now, and so we weren't properly handling that, so we fixed that up. And as well, if a firewall allowed rule is also allowed to be nil, and so we handle that case now as well. For IBM Cloud, we fixed the refresh of a VPC network manager. So VPC refreshes all of its child managers together. And so if you were trying to do a full refresh of a network manager directly, it was failing because it wasn't able to get to the storage manager. So we fixed that up by just simply delegating the refresh to the parent cloud manager, since they all get refreshed together anyway. This is probably a pattern that will apply to the rest of the providers to clean up some of the override logic that we had to be able to get this working. It's a lot more simple to just delegate straight to the parent. For Power VS, Jay fixed up an issue with one of the dialogues on the VM provision form. The IP address looked like it was required, but it actually wasn't. So he fixed that. So it's able to be, you're able to skip that completely. And for Power HMC, Vincent added a check to see if their performance metrics capture service is enabled before going to collect metrics on a host. So we're able to actually tell this during refresh, and they are able to skip hosts completely for metric collection if it isn't enabled, which is a nice performance boost over queuing everything and then later on when it gets run, checking to see if we're able to collect metrics for that host or not. Next slide. For Oracle Cloud, Nasser added create, update, and delete support for both the Oracle and MySQL database types on Oracle. He also refactored the cloud database specs to clean those up nicely. For Overt, we added a fix to ensure that the network manager isn't shown in the dropdown of providers that you can create directly. This was fallout from copy and paste of the original OpenStack network manager. And we switched how we're doing supported for create. This had the side effect, unexpected side effect of allowing you to create the Overt network manager directly, which would then promptly fail when it tried to load the parameters. We also removed the VM import class, which was used by Overt and Rev for V2V migration from VMware to Rev. The backend for this is gone, and so we also were able to clean up the VM import class. And for VMware, we fixed a bug where supports publish was actually true in the base class, and then at the time it was added, classes which didn't support it had supports not. Of course, we've since added more infra managers to the product at this point, so they were unexpectedly defaulting to true. So we flipped that around to be more in line with the pattern, so that supports false in core, and anything that supports the feature says that it supports in their subclass, and so got that cleaned up. And I believe that's it for providers. Over to Joe.
Okay, so for the platform enhancements, Previously, you could specify a regex field. So Akil added the ability to specify a custom validation message. So for example, your regex doesn't match, it can give you a useful message to display. I added updated translations from the translations team. Minal refactored how we specify the yarn version to use the shell command just to eliminate duplication of code we already have. Keenan did a few different pull requests, one for moving away from supports Memcache and just some of the appliance-centric nature of some of the code, since that was no longer needed as we weren't managing Memcache in that way. He also added some work towards the support feature mixin by removing some of the tests where the way they were stubbing and behaving with that was also something he worked on. In addition, he did have a change for testing hostname on Macs. It was inconsistent, so he removed that for testing on Macs. Next slide, please. Okay, so Adam made a change. We had previously defined Boolean methods for the VM advanced settings using an old active record API. So he changed it to use the new active record type API, which isn't exactly new, but it brought it up to stuff. Keenan worked on fixing some invalid SQL that we were generating for values that weren't properly defined as virtual attributes. Keenan also added secure headers for Apache static assets. Adam bumped to the latest Nokogiri for security fixes. Previously, we allowed Nokogiri, but this requires 113.6 as the minimum now. And Minal added some IBM Z build fixes around things for how we install some of the environment and clean up the environment afterwards. On to Jay for the API.
Okay. On the API side, a new operation VM set description was added. So on a VM, you can send the set description action in order to set the description natively. Keenan also made some changes to use the proper queue name for EMS operations. There were a handful where it was putting it on a different queue, and now it uses the actual queue name for that EMS. And on the refactoring side, Keenan made a change to reduce the edit action in about 15 controllers to use the standard API resource. This is toward his continual work to make the API code a lot simpler. And that's it on the API side. And I think that's it overall. So thanks everyone for coming to the Sprint 188 review. The Sprint 189 review will be on June 15th. Notice the meeting time is now 9:30 a.m. And same Zoom link as usual. And I'd like to thank everyone from the ManageIQ community, all the presenters today, and everybody in the community for their contributions. Thanks. Have a great day.